Cowboy needs a fake date for his ex's Christmas party, but he turns heads and steals the spotlight. Wyatt stood by the sprawling window of his ranch house, the rugged silhouette of the mountains stretching endlessly before him. His phone buzzed, the screen flashing with a name he had not seen in a long time: Blake. He debated letting it ring out, but curiosity, or something closer to defiance, won. He answered. "Wyatt," came the voice, smooth and confident. "Still too busy saving the world one head of cattle at a time?" "What do you want, Blake?" he asked flatly, his eyes narrowing on the distant horizon. "I just wanted to let you know I'm throwing a Christmas party," he said with a mock sweetness. "With my fiancé, someone who actually knows how to commit. Of course you're invited," he said. "Nothing." Blake chuckled. "Come on, Wyatt. It's been what, 3 years since we broke up, and you still haven't managed to find anyone new? Or are you just so insufferable no man can stand you longer than a weekend?" He let out a quiet breath. "That's none of your business." "Oh, but it is," Blake purred. "I told everyone you'd show up alone. I mean, it is your pattern. Cold, proud, incapable of real connection." A pause. "Unless you surprise us all, maybe bring someone. That is, if someone's willing to pretend they love you for a night." Wyatt stared out the window, jaw tightening. "You'll be surprised," he said quietly. "Good," Blake said. "I like surprises." The call ended. The next morning, he found himself in the small town square, his head pounding from the conversation. He needed air, perspective, or maybe just silence. As he walked past the local coffee shop, the sight of someone sitting by the window pulled his attention. It was a young man bent over a sketchbook, his dark hair falling across his forehead. He was wearing a simple, worn-out sweater, and his brow was furrowed in concentration. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that seemed to push back against the world. Wyatt watched for a moment as the man's pencil flew across the page, capturing the likeness of an old woman sipping her tea at the next table, with a startling mix of accuracy and warmth. Wyatt entered the shop and waited until the man finished his drawing, lifting his head with a satisfied sigh. He looked up, meeting Wyatt's eyes with a flicker of caution. "You're very talented," Wyatt said. "I have a name, too," he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. "Julian," he nodded slowly. "Wyatt, Julian." Julian looked him up and down, taking in the worn jeans, the sturdy boots, and the faint scent of leather and open air. "Let me guess. Rancher, cowboy, something?" "Close enough," he hesitated, then added, "I have a strange proposal." Julian raised a brow. "I don't do anything illegal." "Not illegal, just unusual," Wyatt said. "I need a date. Just one evening. A party." He laughed short and disbelieving. "You don't strike me as the kind of guy who can't find someone to go with him to a party." "It's not just any party," he admitted. "It's my ex's Christmas party. He's expecting me to show up alone." Julian folded his arms. "And you want me to play Prince Charming?" "You'd be paid," Wyatt said generously. "Enough to help you out. Maybe more than just that." He stared at him for a moment, amused and skeptical. "Why me?" "Because you're not part of his world," Wyatt said quietly. "He wouldn't see you coming." His eyes narrowed. "You're trying to humiliate your ex." "I'm trying to reclaim something," he corrected. "And you're the only one I've met in a long time who doesn't seem like they care about impressing anyone." He shook his head. "I sketch strangers in coffee shops, Wyatt. I'm not built for fancy parties and places with valet parking." "That's exactly why you'll shine," Wyatt said. Julian laughed again, but there was something more bitter beneath it this time. "That's a pretty line." Then Wyatt said softly, "I'll make a donation to the Community Arts Center, enough to keep it open for the next year." The laughter vanished from his face. He looked at him, eyes narrowing. "How do you know about that?" "I don't," he admitted. "It was a guess, but I saw the flyer on the community board when I walked in, and I saw the look on your face when you were drawing that woman. You care about this town." Julian didn't speak for a long moment, then softly, "You're serious?" "I am," he said. "One night, a few hours. I'll cover everything." He exhaled slowly, then finally nodded. "But you better make it worth it, cowboy." Wyatt gave him a rare smile. "I will." The nicest clothing store in the next town over was a far cry from Fifth Avenue, but it still felt alien to Julian. He stood stiffly in front of a mirror as a sales assistant showed him blazer after blazer. Wyatt sat quietly on a nearby bench, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp shirt, watching without comment. He had driven them here straight after one of his cattle auctions, barely checking his phone during the fitting, a rarity, Julian noted. "This one has a very modern cut," the assistant said, holding up a sleek black jacket. Julian shook his head. It felt like a costume. "It's a Christmas party, right?" Julian asked, turning to Wyatt. "Shouldn't it be a little festive?" He spotted a rack of sweaters nearby and walked over, pulling out a deep forest green one with a subtle cable knit pattern. It was simple, soft, and comfortable. He held it up. "What about this?" Wyatt stood up slowly. "That one," he said. He then picked up a plain, deep red sweater for himself. "We should match the occasion, not the crowd." Julian looked down at himself in the green sweater, felt like him. He nodded slowly, then reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a worn leather-bound sketchbook, frayed at the edges. "I'm keeping this with me," he said. "It's my grandfather's." Wyatt simply nodded. "It works." By the time they finished, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the plains. "I don't have time for dinner out," Wyatt said, checking his watch, "but we could cook at my place. We still need to run through our story." Julian raised an eyebrow. "You cook?" "I do." His ranch house was warm and rustic, exactly how Julian imagined it would be. A massive stone fireplace, worn leather furniture, and a kitchen that was surprisingly modern, but clearly well used. He stared at the thick butcher block countertops. "Are you sure you actually cook in here?" Wyatt rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong, scarred forearms. "Used to cook every night for my dad when he was sick. It stuck." Julian opened a drawer and blinked. "You organized your utensils by size and function?" "Efficiency," he said with a smirk. He snorted. "You're a serial killer." While Wyatt chopped onions with practiced ease, Julian tried to mimic him. His knife slipped, sending onion slices flying. He yelped, dropping the knife and backing up dramatically. "Okay, I'm officially banned from all sharp objects." Wyatt chuckled, stepping in and gently guiding him. "Like this. Firm grip. Curl your fingers." As Julian resumed, Wyatt moved to prep the steak. Julian sneezed, blinking through the onion tears. "How do you do this without crying?" "Experience," he said, "and emotional repression." He knocked over the salt shaker, groaning as the granules spilled across the counter. Wyatt grabbed a towel and helped clean it up without a word. "Consider it extra flavor," he said, like a little chaos added to a perfect plan. Julian glanced at him. "You don't get mad easily, do you?" "I've learned not to." Soon, potatoes roasted in the oven and steak sizzled in a cast-iron pan. They moved with a rhythm, not perfect but natural, and by the time they sat at the large wooden dining table, it smelled like a five-star restaurant. "So," Wyatt said, refilling his water glass, "Blake will ask what you do. I'll say I'm an artist. Coffee shops, town squares, birthday parties for dogs." "Say you draw to live," Wyatt said, smiling slightly. "Not to impress." Julian tilted his head. "You like correcting people, don't you?" "I like clarity." They ate in silence for a moment, the mood surprisingly light. Then he raised his glass of water. "A toast." Wyatt muffed his own. "To what?" Julian grinned. "To poverty. The only reason we're not drinking wine." They clinked glasses. "To low expectations," Wyatt added, deadpan. "And the thrill of pretending," Julian said more softly. He studied him. "This doesn't feel like pretending." Julian looked away. "Not yet, anyway." When they finished, Julian leaned back in his chair. "I still think this whole thing is insane." "It is," Wyatt admitted, "but somehow I think it might just work." "For one night," Julian said. "For one night," Wyatt echoed, but in his chest, something tugged at the certainty of that limit. The grand fireplace in Blake's sprawling ranch house roared with warmth, casting a glow over crystal glasses and designer suits. Waiters glided between guests like ghosts in black and white, and the hum of moneyed conversation hovered in the air like expensive cologne. Wyatt walked in first, composed as ever in his plain red sweater and dark brown cowboy hat. But when Julian stepped beside him in the green Christmas sweater, the room shifted. His presence was not loud, but it was magnetic. His steps were light, confident but unassuming. He wore no flashy watch, no designer labels, only his comfortable sweater and the sketchbook he held loosely in one hand. And yet heads turned, conversations trailed off, glasses paused midway to lips. Wyatt offered him his arm.
He took it with a slight smirk. "You look like you planned this." "I did," Wyatt replied under his breath. Blake was near the center of the room, surrounded by wealthy ranchers and their partners. He turned at the stir of attention and froze. His eyes narrowed, his smile faltered just for a second. "Wyatt," he greeted, the words honeyed with sarcasm. His gaze swept over Julian with slow, deliberate disdain. "You found someone interesting." Julian gave a small nod, perfectly polite. Blake's voice dipped low, venom laced with silk. "Did you pick him up at the bus station, or does he just clean up nicely for the holidays?" Wyatt's jaw tightened, but Julian placed a light hand on his arm, his signal to let him handle it. "I spend a lot of time at the bus station. The morning light is perfect for sketching," Julian said, calm and unshaken.
Blinked. So a local artist. How quaint. If by quaint you mean unforgettable, Julian added with a sweet smile, then yes. Wyatt couldn't hide the flicker of amusement in his eyes. They moved away before Blake could reply, drifting toward the quieter side of the room. Julian exhaled softly. "Your ex has sharp claws." "He's always been a collector," Wyatt murmured. "Of status, of people. He likes things that shine until they don't." Julian didn't respond. Instead, he noticed an older couple seated near a tall, wreath-adorned window, their fingers intertwined, eyes soft with age and memory. He walked over gently. "Happy anniversary," he said, after catching snippets of their conversation. The woman beamed. 52 years today." Julian smiled, pulled his sketchbook and a charcoal pencil from his pocket, and with swift, graceful strokes began to draw. Wyatt watched from across the room, a glass of water in hand. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even smile. He just watched. When Julian handed them the sketch, two gentle faces side by side, under a little arch of mistletoe, the woman gasped, pressing her fingers to her lips. Her husband blinked hard. Overcome, Julian touched the woman's shoulder lightly, then turned to leave. As he approached the table where Wyatt waited, Wyatt stood and, without a word, pulled out his chair. Julian sat. Wyatt pushed it in. Julian looked at him. He didn't speak, but in his eyes was something soft, something unguarded. Before he could say anything, Blake's voice rang out, cutting through the ambient Christmas music. "Julian, was it?" he called, all sugary invitation. "Would you draw something for us? I mean, since you perform in public, you must enjoy an audience." Wyatt tensed. Julian smiled slowly. "Of course." Gasps whispered around the room as he rose and crossed the floor, unhurried, unflustered. He didn't take center stage. Instead, he simply walked to the fireplace, sat on the hearth, and opened a sketchbook. He didn't draw Blake or his fiancée. He began to sketch the room itself, the laughter, the quiet moments, the flicker of the firelight in people's eyes. His hand moved with a quiet, mesmerizing confidence. One by one, guests turned toward him. Glasses lowered, conversations stopped. His work carried something that couldn't be bought. Honesty, joy wrapped in simple lines, hope stitched into every shadow. Wyatt felt it like a slow warmth spreading through his chest, undoing armor. Even Blake stood frozen, his smile stiff, his fingers tightening around his glass. When he finished the panoramic sketch, he held it up. The room was silent for a beat too long. Then the applause broke, sincere, startled, rising. Julian tore the page carefully from his book, handed it to the anniversary couple, and walked back to Wyatt. He sat beside him again, eyes down for a second. Wyatt leaned closer. "You were unbelievable." "I just drew," he whispered. "No," Wyatt said. "You reminded them what real feels like." He didn't reach for his hand, didn't say anything else, but he didn't need to. The way he looked at him, he wasn't pretending anymore. The country road was quiet under a canopy of brilliant stars, the kind you only see far away from city lights. Wyatt and Julian walked side by side, the chill of the December air making their breath visible. The post-party tension had melted away into something softer, almost tentative. Neither of them spoke at first. Julian looked up at the sky.
Well, that was unexpected. Wyatt chuckled. You mean your show-stealing performance or Blake's face during it? Both, he grinned, then glanced at him. You okay? You were quiet after. I was watching, he said. The way you silenced a room without raising your voice. Just then, a cold wind picked up slightly. Julian instinctively hunched his shoulders, but before he could say a word, Wyatt shrugged off his shirling-lined coat and draped it over him. You'll get cold, Julian said. I'll survive. He gave a small smile. You stood up for me, least I can do. Julian looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his voice. They continued walking, closer now. The kind of quiet that wrapped around them was not awkward. It was full, like a song waiting for its chorus. Can I ask something? Julian said. Of course. Are you still pretending? Wyatt didn't answer right away. He looked ahead, watching the dirt road curve gently toward a row of distant fence posts. A single light burned in a far-off barn. He exhaled, his voice low. I don't know what this is, but tonight with you, I haven't felt this light in years, not even when I thought I was in love before. Julian stared at him for a second, then looked away. That's a good answer. They arrived at a familiar building. Worn wood, peeling paint, a hand-painted sign above that simply said, Community Arts. I volunteer here every Saturday, Julian said. Want to come in? Wyatt tilted his head. You inviting me to see the real thing now? Julian pushed the door open with a wink. If you can handle it. Inside, the space was humble and cozy. It smelled of clay and turpentine. Children's paintings covered the walls, and lopsided pottery sat on shelves. The main room was barely more than a large, open space with a few tables and chairs. Julian handed Wyatt his warm coat, walked to a corner filled with easels and canvases, and turned on a single spotlight. No glam, no fancy parties, just him. He picked up a piece of charcoal and turned to a blank canvas. He looked at Wyatt, then began. His movements were the same, yet different, more unguarded, more alive. He sketched a wild horse, its mane flying, its expression fierce, but rooted in freedom. Wyatt sat on a stool watching, and something inside him shifted again. Not because Julian was dazzling, but because he was real, and he was no longer pretending, and neither was he.
Had just made the loudest gesture, without saying much at all, and Wyatt listened to the quiet scratch of charcoal on canvas, his eyes never leaving him. Wyatt stood in his office, staring out at the rolling hills. His reflection in the glass was pale and tired, the weight of days catching up with him. He had barely slept, his thoughts tied up in everything Julian made him feel and everything he was afraid of losing. The door clicked open behind him. "Wyatt?" came the familiar voice of his younger sister, Clara, poised, elegant, always exact with her words. She walked in with a stack of ledgers but laid them aside. Her expression was businesslike, but there was tension beneath it. "We need to talk about him." He turned slowly. "His name is Julian. He is not right for you." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "He is not our world, and you know it." Clara folded her arms. "You have worked your entire life to build this legacy, and now you are risking everything for someone who doodles in coffee shops and runs a charity case. He is not a risk. He is the only thing that has ever made sense to me." "He is not sustainable," Clara snapped. "Do you know what people are already saying? That you've lost your edge, that this, whatever this is a distraction." Wyatt walked toward her, his voice low and firm. "Maybe I wanted to be distracted. Maybe I'm tired of chasing expectations that never made me feel alive." Clara's voice softened, but not her stance. "He will be crushed in our world. He doesn't belong, and deep down, you know that." Neither of them noticed the office door was still ajar, and in the hallway, clutching a brown paper bag with 2 takeaway soups and fresh bread, stood Julian. He had wanted to surprise Wyatt with lunch, thought they could talk, maybe laugh a little after all the intensity of recent days. But what he heard stopped him cold. "He doesn't belong." The words hit like cold water. He didn't wait for more. He turned away, the bag slipping from his fingers as he fled the house. No one stopped him. Inside, Wyatt turned back to his desk, unaware of what had just slipped through his fingers. That night, he called him, straight to voicemail. He texted, nothing. He visited the art center, no sign of him. The old woman at the desk shook her head. "Haven't seen him in days." He tried the coffee shop, the bookstore he once mentioned. He even stood outside the small apartment building he knew Julian lived in, but he did not come out. No light in his window, no sign of life, just silence. Days turned into nearly a week. He canceled meetings, barely ate, his ranch hands covered for him, but whispers grew. He sat on the hill overlooking his land, the same one where Julian once told him he drew, not for fame, but so someone in the dark might feel a little less alone. He held the sketch Julian had given him, a portrait of him from that first dinner, not the powerful rancher, but the version he saw underneath. The one who quietly cooked a meal, who smiled when no one was looking, who carried loneliness like a worn saddlebag. Wyatt traced the edge of the paper with his thumb. A breeze passed through the junipers, and he whispered, as if the air could carry it to wherever he was hiding. "I'm sorry I let them speak louder than my heart." He stood, slipping the drawing back into his pocket, his jaw clenched with a new determination. "If you won't come back to me," he murmured, "I'll come to you." The town was buzzing that Saturday afternoon. Music echoed from every street corner as part of the annual Christmas festival. Booths lined the sidewalks, children with painted faces ran between stands, and a small crowd had begun to gather around a makeshift stage set beneath a canopy of string lights and pine boughs. Wyatt had not planned to be there. He had driven aimlessly for hours, trying to clear his head, trying to quiet the ache that had taken residence in his chest since Julian disappeared. But something made him stop. The quiet hush of a crowd, the focus on a single point. He got out of his truck and walked toward it, and then he saw him. Julian stood on the small wooden platform, hair swept to one side, a charcoal stick in his hand. He was not dressed for performance, just a simple gray sweater, his old sketchbook propped on an easel. He was doing a live portrait of the town's oldest resident, his hand moving with a quiet, confident grace. He wasn't speaking, just drawing, but the crowd was mesmerized. Wyatt only saw him. He stepped forward through the crowd, each footfall steady. Julian looked up and saw him. His hand faltered slightly, but he kept drawing. Wyatt did not stop walking until he was just below the stage. When Julian placed the final stroke on the paper, silence fell, and Wyatt spoke, clear and calm for everyone to hear. "I told you once to help me pretend, to fool a room full of people into thinking we were in love, but the only person who got fooled was me." Julian stared down at him, tears welling. "I thought I was just hiring a partner for a night, but you made me feel like a version of myself I had forgotten. You made me laugh, made me think, made me see the world with new eyes." He took a breath. "And then I let them tell me you weren't enough. But the truth is, Julian, I was afraid you would realize I wasn't enough for you." Someone in the crowd gasped softly. Julian's hand trembled, the charcoal stick held loosely in his fingers. Wyatt stepped closer to the stage. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't care what parties you fit into or what people expect. I only care about what I feel when you draw, what I feel when I look at you. It's real. It's the only thing that's ever been real." Julian dropped the charcoal gently onto the stool beside him. His eyes shimmered, and in the quiet, a single tear traced down his cheek. Then he stepped off the stage, one step, then another, and when he was close enough, he didn't speak. He just fell into Wyatt's arms. The crowd erupted in applause, but neither of them heard it clearly. They were holding on too tightly. Wyatt whispered into his hair, "I'm sorry it took me so long." Julian looked up, his voice soft, raw, and sure. I was just waiting for the truth. And there, in the middle of a town square surrounded by strangers and Christmas carols, they found their way back. Not through grand gestures or perfect words, but through the only thing that had always connected them, the truth in a steady hand and the courage to see it. The town had changed. It was subtle, less about new buildings and more about the rhythm of the streets. Where silence once settled, now the sounds of laughter and creativity floated through open doors, and in the center of it all was the beautifully restored brick building with a painted sign above the door, the Art Barn. Inside, children sat cross-legged with sketch pads too big for their arms. Some molded clay, others painted, as Julian gently guided them through their creations. His voice was softer here, not performing, but teaching, giving. Classes were free. No kid was ever turned away. What most did not know was that every paintbrush, every canvas, every light bulb had been quietly paid for by Wyatt. He never put his name on anything. That was how he wanted it. Their home was the main house on the ranch, filled now not just with leather and wood, but with canvases and the scent of oil paints. Every evening, Julian would sketch as Wyatt sat beside him, a notebook in hand, scribbling down thoughts he never thought he had inside him. They called it evening practice, though most nights ended in laughter and unfinished work. One night was different. The town's annual Christmas tree lighting had been organized in the square. No suits, no spotlights, just neighbors, blankets, and string lights swinging in the wind. Wyatt had not planned to be there. He had driven aimlessly for hours, trying to clear his head, trying to quiet the ache that had taken residence in his chest since Julian disappeared. But something made him stop. The quiet hush of a crowd, the focus on a single point. He got out of his truck and walked toward it. And then he saw him. Julian stood on the small wooden platform, hair swept to one side, a charcoal stick in his hand. He was not dressed for performance, just a simple gray sweater, his old sketchbook propped on an easel. He was doing a live portrait of the town's oldest resident, his hand moving with a quiet, confident grace. He wasn't speaking, just drawing, but the crowd was mesmerized. Wyatt only saw him. He stepped forward through the crowd, each footfall steady. Julian looked up and saw him. His hand faltered slightly, but he kept drawing. Wyatt did not stop walking until he was just below the stage. When Julian placed the final stroke on the paper, silence fell, and Wyatt spoke, clear and calm for everyone to hear. "I told you once to help me pretend, to fool a room full of people into thinking we were in love, but the only person who got fooled was me." Julian stared down at him, tears welling. "I thought I was just hiring a partner for a night, but you made me feel like a version of myself I had forgotten. You made me laugh, made me think, made me see the world with new eyes." He took a breath. "And then I let them tell me you weren't enough. But the truth is, Julian, I was afraid you would realize I wasn't enough for you." Someone in the crowd gasped softly. Julian's hand trembled, the charcoal stick held loosely in his fingers. Wyatt stepped closer to the stage. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't care what parties you fit into,